So, welcome to Injuries Overcome, episode 16. This week, joining me, EFL star Joe Jacobson. You know, quite an end to your career last year, Joe. Tell us about the emotions from sort of that day and the build up to it, and what life is like for you now.
Yeah, it was. I think the whole season as a whole didn't go exactly to plan. I started the season in the team and played the first game of the season. And after one or two games, I got an injury that I probably should have taken a little bit more time out to nurture it and to get it right. But at the time, I was so desperate to get back in the team that I didn't really take the proper advice, I would say, off the medical staff, and ended up getting a longer injury, and it kind of set me back. And yeah, from getting told Christmas January time, that I probably wasn't going to play many more minutes for the rest of the season, it's just hard to take. I think from being, I'm so used to playing every game for the last, I don't know, not just at Wycombe, probably for the 15 years before that. It was tough. It was a different situation, but I had to kind of use my skills in other ways around the dressing room and building up. I knew the last game was going to be my last game. It so happened that a few weeks before the end of the season, I got told that I was on 397 games and they wanted to get me up to 400. So the manager kind of put me in for a couple of appearances, and then culminating in the last game of the season being my 400th at home. Had my family there, my wife was there, and it was emotional. I actually had a little concussion during the game, which I probably should have come off, but at that point I was like, I can't come off. Could be my last game. And at the time I didn't think that I was going to retire, but I think from things that kind of happened afterwards and opportunities I got, then it kind of made my decision that it's time to step away.
So that's really interesting. So how did you find trying to make an impact while being in the team around the dressing room, but not actually featuring? Obviously, you've played a number of years at Wycombe. You've had a long career. As you said, you played your 400th game, which was your last. So you must have had a lot of respect on you from other players. So do you find that you were doing the speeches? Were you just sort of encouraging people? What was that like?
Yeah, I suppose it's different. So when you're injured and you're out of the kind of everyday training, so you do feel a little bit distant from the team. I think once I got back fit and then I wasn't in the team, but I was still training every day, it was just about setting high standards and making sure that I was professional and didn't let, being the club captain, if I let my standards slip, then, I'm giving excuses to everyone else to do the same thing. So I wanted to make sure that I was, if anyone needed advice or help, I would help out with certain players. They'd come to me and we do extra training. I travelled a couple of times with the team, not being in the squad, knowing I wasn't in the squad, just to kind of be around it and have my presence. I was probably a big character within the dressing room, and the manager at times wanted me around it. So it was, I think you just have to kind of realise where you're at. I think the problem that a lot of players have is realising their actual position at any given moment within the team structure, whether they're the star player or whether they're someone who we just need you to turn up and be a number for training or anywhere in between. And I think I managed to find my position quite quickly, which is probably due to experience and where I was at the time. But just to try and help navigate things. And there was conversations with the manager at times about players, about transfers and things like that, which I liked that side of it, so I wanted to get involved with. So just trying to find and start thinking about life after football as well. I think that was important.
So do you think the involvement in the team helped you sort of progress then off the pitch? Because obviously, as you say, a lot of players don't take the thought of finishing their footballing career very well, whereas you sort of had an involvement, and as you gradually sort of left and then obviously came back into the team to earn your 400th game.
Yeah, I think it probably helped actually that I wasn't playing. I think it made me think a lot more about what I want to do afterwards. I was contemplating, do I carry on playing? I think when I first got told in January, I was just like, no, I still want to play. I want to carry on playing. And the longer it went on, the more I started thinking about things. I've been studying with the PFA. They've got a business school like a football business management course, and I started going in on my days off at the office at the club and learning off a few of the guys there and sitting down with the guys who do the operations, the ticketing, the marketing, all that kind of stuff, and started learning that side of it. And the more then, probably after the season, where I'd spoken to a couple of managers and clubs who wanted to have those discussions about next season, that I started to think way more longer term than just the next 10 months. I was thinking next 10 years. And fortunately, I was having conversations with someone who I used to work for at the football club, and they had plans on doing something else and wanted to take me with. So for me, that was the opportunity to say, right, I can't turn this down. I can start my next career straight away, finish on not personally a high, but still in a good level, with a good reputation, and that was important for me as well.
So just leading off of that, then you say you sort of didn't maybe finish as high as you expected. Maybe that's just the high standards that you set. But the average lifespan of a footballer's career in football is 9 years, and you yourself spent that amount of time at one club, let alone the rest of the time in your career. So do you feel fortunate? Do you feel sort of lucky? What's the feeling behind that? Because obviously it's a long career that you've had.
Yeah, I definitely feel extremely lucky and fortunate to have had the career that I've had. Like you said, then I've played with numerous players that have played one professional game, let alone 650 or thereabouts that I played. So yes, very fortunate to have the longevity that I had. I think that in hindsight, if I'd have played 40 games last season, I doubt I would have then felt that I'm ready to stop playing. I would have been thinking, I've got loads more to give. But because I think the season that I had, the disappointments I had throughout the season, I was starting to feel, what, do I want to go and start this again and have this, carry on having these disappointments? I thought, now is a good time to kind of step away. And when I talk about didn't leave on a high, I think it was having a season where I was playing week in, week out. But then if I was going to have that, I wouldn't have stopped. So maybe I needed to have the season that I had to stop playing. And I don't look back on my career with any regrets or anything like that. I loved every minute of it, and was very fortunate to just go and play football with my mates every day for 20 years. So it was great.
Yeah, and obviously, as we spoke about, you've had a long career, yet you also had injuries during that. How do you think that your mindset was what helped you recover quicker, or was it like, how do you feel about that? Because obviously, getting injured, playing the amount of games you've played, that doesn't usually coincide, but yet it has done for you.
Yeah, when I look back, I missed. There was a spell early on in my career for about 2 years where I had a lot of injuries and didn't play too many games. And then I was, for 12, 13 years, I had no injuries pretty much up until last season. And I think I was always someone who healed quickly. I don't know why that was. I just felt like I could, that I'd go for a scan and there would be a tear and they would say 6 weeks, and in 2 weeks I'd be back training. And I don't know, I would try and do everything. My wife I would annoy the hell out of her because I'd sit in front of the TV at night with the ice machine, the game readies on, or the legs that blow up and pump up and things like that, and are really noisy, and she used to hate it. But little things like that I just wanted to do. I wanted to just get back as quickly as possible, and I'd always play through pain. I had an injury when I was about 18 with my back, and I had a stress fracture in my spine that wasn't properly diagnosed. And I remember for months on end, I would not really train. I'd play a match and I'd be in agony for days afterwards, and just repeat that cycle for a while. And I remember looking up, the physio at the time showed me in the book like what to do for this injury, and it just said change sports. And I was like, I can't do that. What am I going to do? So eventually, but because it didn't get properly diagnosed and sorted out when I was younger, for years on end, then I've had issues with my back, and that's always been a problem. So it's just knowing your body, I think, is really important, and knowing what you need to do every single day. I'd go in and spend an hour in the gym working on tiny little bits that I knew that I had to do just to get through training that day. And I think that's coming into the game a lot more. And I just felt like I know my body very, very well. And I was able to just know what I needed to do in order to get myself through training or matches.
And is that the sort of advice that you passed on to people in your career as well, as you say, the ones that maybe are coming up through the academies that aren't playing yet or have played a lot, and you see that they're struggling?
Yeah, I think when I was coming through it, there wasn't that culture of getting in early and working on yourself. It was you turn up 10 minutes before you needed to, you go and train, and if there was a gym session, you do it. If not, you go home. And I think now you see, especially at Wycombe, we created an amazing culture where players were getting in. It was almost a competition how early players could get in and how late they could leave. And in the end, there was signs that saying you've got to leave the building by 4:30, whatever it was, even though training had finished at 1. So it was. I think once you see the senior players who have had a career doing that, I think the younger players just automatically want to learn and want to copy it. And I think football's changing that. I think football see what Ronaldo's done throughout his career and seeing how dedicated he is. And everyone thinks, right, I want to be that person. I want to get to the top. And if that's doing everything I can for myself, then, younger players now, they don't drink hardly as much as what the players did years ago and things like that. They take care of themselves a lot more. So it's got a lot more professional. And I think, I was very open and honest talking to younger players about what I used to do and what probably not to do. But, it's allowed me my experiences and my know-how of myself have allowed me to get to where I was.
So let's cast back then to the start of your career, your professional debut. Obviously, you said, you had a long spell in your career where you didn't suffer with injuries, but at the beginning there was a few issues for you. What was it like making your debut, first of all? And then what was it like knowing that you were going to be on the sidelines for the first time properly in your professional career?
First of all, making my debut it's one of the one or two biggest moments of my career still. It was everything I'd kind of worked towards for so long. And for when you leave school at 16, I joined a YTS, but it was called back then scholarship, or I think they're scholars now. And to be able to get into the first team seemed miles away. It was like a distant dream. And I'd see one or two friends that are a couple of years older get an appearance here or there, and I just thought it was never going to happen. I was never the standout player in my age group or anything like that. And so when it did finally come, I started to realize I was doing well, but I was never, putting up any trees or anything like that. I was just going along how I go along. And so to make my debut, get called into the squad and get onto the pitch was unbelievable. Amazing feeling. Thought I'd cracked it. Thought I'd made it. The week after, then I was out the squad again. So that kind of fun was over for the time, and then it was the end of the season. So I wish I'd gone back to that moment, and probably that summer just kicked on and gone and done a lot of work on myself. But I didn't. I just went off like a 19-year-old and messed around for the summer until I came back to training. So then the first, I would say, long-term injury I had was I actually went and signed for Bristol Rovers and had a good season there. I got called up into the national team at Wales. I was playing for the under-21s, called up into the national team in the summer, went away for a camp. There was 2 games, unfortunately didn't get on the pitch for the senior team. But when I came back to pre-season, I think in the first pre-season game we went on tour to Sweden, and in a tackle, I got caught late and did my MCL. So I was probably out for about 3 or 4 months. And at the time, you don't really think too much. It was my first injury. It was almost like, everyone's making a fuss of you and you're like, all right, this is fine. But then it took me a while to realize that you don't just walk back in the team. You've got to do all the extra work. You're training on your own in the gym. You don't really see the players train at all. At Bristol, it was like we were training at like an airport. The base was like an army base, so you're in like a hangar where it was dark. You're on your own in the gym behind, walls that no one goes in, and it was tough. It wasn't nice, and I tried to force myself back fit, and I was in pain, and I probably shouldn't have done. And I think when you do that, other things break down. And I remember coming back, and a couple of weeks later, I broke down with one or two little issues. So for the rest of that season, it was just stop, start, and it was tough. And I ended up leaving in the summer because of the injuries, really, from what the management said.
And sort of when you were out injured, when was the realization that as you said, you can't just walk back into the team? You had the realization of that, but when can you pinpoint when it was that you thought, I'm not doing the thing that I've worked my whole young life up to do? Like, I'm not going to be able to do this for some time.
Do you know what it's for me? And the older players used to think I was mad. I used to just go out and I wouldn't stretch. I wouldn't do any warm up, and I'd just go and smash balls around the place, and I'd be fine with it. And I missed that. I missed just going out and just being able to kick a ball. And I always used to count on my technique. That was one of my strongest parts of my game, and I couldn't do that. I'm left-footed, and I did my left knee, so I couldn't kick a ball. I was in so much pain kicking the ball, and that was one thing I was like gutted about, that I couldn't enjoy. It wasn't necessarily about even playing matches. It was just going out and kicking footballs around, which I love to do. And I was at the start of my career, and I was like, it just felt like I couldn't, why has it been stopped already? Do this to me when I'm 35 or whatever. But it was, hard. It was really hard. And I remember watching the team, not feeling part of it. Like I said, just not being around it for training. Manager talks to you less. I'm sure everyone said the same thing. Managers talk to you less. They don't care about the injured boys. They'll come and say hello to you, but they just care about the 11 that's starting on the weekend. So I was probably annoying to a lot of people when I was younger, and messed around a lot in the change rooms and playing pranks on people. I think that was my way of kind of staying involved in it, was rather than be a bit of a joker in the dressing room, just to make sure everyone remembers that I'm there as such. But apart from that, it wasn't nice.
And did you find that you were with other players when you were injured when you were younger, or was it more you felt isolated on your own? There wasn't so much of a collective, because I know nowadays from what people talk about, like your ex-teammate David, he spoke about the togetherness of the injured players that sort of helped one another get through difficult times, and they weren't necessarily forgotten when one was 2 weeks further down the line that started to go and train with the first team.
Yeah, and I also think that nowadays people are mollycoddled a lot more. So there's a lot more people stay inside the treatment room. Like I said to you before when we were chatting, that any little stiffness or niggle, that's it, you're pulled from training. There's so much data now as well that say you're going to be in the red zone, you need to take a day off. So you're in a physio room with everyone. So there's always more people now around it. There's obviously more staff, but when I was at Bristol Rovers, I don't remember anyone else being injured at the time. I remember there'd be one physio that had to be out on the pitch because the pitches were quite far away. And there was kind of like a part-time physio that was dealing with my rehab. So it was quite a lonely. I actually did, at the time, the Premier League referees weren't full-time. So there was a referee, Lee Probert. I don't know if you remember him. Ref in the Premier League. I'm sure he did FA Cup finals and things like that. And I think he lived quite local, so he came in and did a lot of the training. So I did a lot of my rehab with him, which was funny because he then refed me a few years later, and we were having a fun chat about it. But nowadays, and especially at Wycombe, I think what Wycombe did so well is, and it was probably not even in their thought process, but the setup of the training ground and how it was that the gym was the middle centerpiece of everything, where everyone kind of congregated, fit, injured, whatever you were. And the physio room was a piece off that, where everyone would hang out a lot of the time. So you're always part of it, and you could see through the physio room, through the windows onto the training pitch if you needed to, into the gym. So it worked out really well. And like probably Dave said, is that we had a good group. There's more staff there now. First of all, there's rehab staff, there's data staff, there's sports science. So everyone's you're moving kind of through the stages of, right, I'm dealing with you for 2 weeks and I'm moving on to this one and this one, this one. And they do more work on schedules and more work on helping you with days off and things like that. So it is a lot better. Wycombe was great with the injured boys, as in everything was on site. I had a tough injury when I signed for Oldham, and I left Bristol thinking, right, I need a fresh start. Signed for Oldham, moved up to Manchester, did pre-season. Last game before pre-season, I felt a pain in my groin, and so we tried to nurse it for a little bit, a couple of weeks. Come back to training again in agony, and I thought, I've just signed for this club. You know, I feel like I'm letting everyone down. The team wasn't doing well. I feel like I need to just get out there and help out. And that was the toughest spell looking back on my whole career. That 18 months I had at Oldham, where the injury wasn't quite diagnosed properly. I ended up having I can't even think of the name of the injury now. Osteitis pubis, which is like it's like a bone in your pubic area that gets inflamed and things like that. But I ended up having operations on my groin, on my tendons, on my ligaments, hernia prevention. Nothing worked. You know, I didn't need those operations, but they sent me just to be like, right, go and try what's going on. I then tried to come back when I was in pain, and I remember the assistant manager, I played a reserve game. I trained one day in about 3 months, and they wanted me to play the next day. I played a reserve team game. I was only ever going to play half a game, played the first half, came off, and I remember being in agony, but just thinking, right, let's just done with it. And I remember that then I got pulled into the manager's office the next day with the manager and the assistant manager, and the assistant manager just battered me and was just like, what have you done since you've been at this football club? You're injured. You don't give a shit, basically. We're struggling and you're just sitting there injured. There's nothing wrong with you. And I was thinking, couldn't move. So yeah, it was a tough, probably 18 months where it took me that long to get pain free. In fact, when I left, it took me more. I ended up going on loan to Accrington, and I found a way to kind of manage it in the end. And it wasn't until I did that in pre-season, it wasn't until the following to about November time, so a year and 4 months later, where I finally felt like I was pain free again. And yeah, it was a tough 18 months that was.
So sort of the main thing that I pick up from that, I relate to you on the sense of having an operation and it not being the thing that's now helped you. So I had my main op, and then I had to have another one to repair more damage that wasn't sorted out in my first op. My mindset for that, although I knew how I would deal with it because I'd had an operation before, that feeling of got to go back through the process again, and maybe then this one might not work. That was really hard for me. So how did you reflect on that, looking back on it?
Yeah, and like you said, when I've had other injuries, it's kind of like if you need a surgery or there's a time frame, you've got something to work towards. Whenever I've had when I did my groin last season, it's going to be 3 months, and right, you go think, right, fine, it's a long time, but you can work towards it, and you can plan it out. You can see what targets you need to hit along the way. When I had that injury, because they didn't know what it was and they were mismanaging it, there was never like, right, do this for 6 weeks and we're going to do this treatment. They were sending me for injections. They were sending, like I said, they were like, okay, fine, at the end of the season, we're going to send you for an operation. And I'm thinking, right, okay, that's going to sort it out. You have the operation, you come back, and literally 10 days later, I was in there saying I'm still painful. So they go, all right, we'll send you back to the same guy and he'll do a different operation. And I was like, you have to trust these people. And you go through it all, you do the rehab, and you come back and you're still pain free, and it's demoralizing. You're like, what can I do to to do it. You're doing everything you're telling me to do. As well, when I was at Oldham, it was difficult because we used to get changed at the stadium, and the players would drive to the training ground. So there's the separation straight away. The injured boys would go to a gym. I was lucky that there was another player who had the same injury at the same time and probably had it worse than I did. But they just send us off. You go off, go and do what you got to do. There was no physio with us. It was very basic. And when you look back now, that obviously I don't think that would happen now at clubs. But the care was just like, right, you can't help us. The physio was like, you're not. I can't work on you to get you fit this week or next week. So just go out there and we'll deal with it. Hopefully you get pain free. And then they take a load of ibuprofen or other anti-inflammatories that. I remember taking them I was taking Voltarol for 6 months, pretty much on the max dosage. And then you read the box and it says, do not take longer than 6 weeks or whatever it was. And I was like, and in fact, later on down the line, a few years ago, I got quite ill and I had, problems with my liver and all the research says it's because I've taken too many anti-inflammatories in my career. So, yeah, it's looking back now. I wish, I didn't rush into things, but again, when these people in the medical profession are telling you something, who am I to not trust what they're saying, and you have to go along with it. And I remember just thinking, I just want to go out and help and play. I want to show people what I can do. I want to help the team in a bad time, and I think that was the frustrating thing, is that I couldn't. I just signed for a new team. No one knew what I was doing or what I could do, how good I was. And I wanted to show everyone that, once I'm fit, I'm going to be a good player for this team. And I wasn't able to do that.
So obviously early in your career, you're taking a chance on. So a club will look at you and go, we've not really seen you play professional football, but, we've heard you're good. We think you're a good player. So we want you. Then to get injured at the start of your career, not just once, but multiple times. Did it ever cross your mind at the start thinking that you might not be able to continue football? Or was it a case of just get through this and see what happens?
Yeah, I was never thinking that I wanted out. And I was never thinking that I was in trouble of kind of falling out of the game. I think that spell at Oldham, I felt like when I was younger, when I was between the ages of say 19 and 21, I had a good reputation in the game. I was doing well at Cardiff. I broke into the first team. I was playing for Wales under 21s, and we were doing well as a team. So I think people knew of me, and I had a good start to my career at Bristol. So I played a decent amount of games when I was younger, and then it was from 22 to 24 where I had that period of it was really tough. And I was fortunate that, and I suppose this probably helped me out, that when I was at Cardiff, originally I went on loan to Accrington and spent 2 months there with the management, John Coleman, Jimmy Bell. And when I got told at Oldham, after I just had my operations and I came back for pre-season, the new manager came in, pulled me in first week and said, you got to find a new club. And I was like, well, I'm injured, I need to get fit. And he's like, okay, you can stay around it and you can train and you can be involved, but we prefer it if you start, find a new club. Anyway, first week of the season, I'm getting back fit, and there's about 4 or 5 of us now that had been told, and it was like, right, you 4 or 5 go and train over there. You're not involved in the first team. But they were fit and they were thinking, right, I need to get out of here. I need to go and carry on my career. My mindset was I need to get fit first before I can do anything else. I managed to get fit and actually was like, right, I'm better than what you've got. I'm going to show you. Played reserve team games and forced my way back into the team, actually. And it wasn't until, I got told that by the chief exec that I had to leave. There was no way, for me to be in the team. And I think later on in my career, I would have kicked up more of a fuss. But, at that time, I was just like, right, I'll leave, and went back to Accrington where the guys were still there. And that kind of kick-started my career again. I'm, very, very thankful that they gave me that opportunity back. Went there, was fortunate that we had a successful 6 months when I was there, and was able to get a you had to drop down to Accrington and go back to Shrewsbury, who were a bigger club at the time, and kickstart my career again. So I think players now are fearful of ever dropping down. They're so scared of dropping down. I think they don't trust themselves that they're going to get back up. But it's what I had to do, and it was probably the only way that I could do it at the time.
So my next question, I think you've answered this, to be honest. When obviously you were going through that period of injury and stuff, or it doesn't even have to be that particular point in your career, but who were the managers, who were the sort of the people in charge of the football clubs that you were at? Who were the ones that sort of gave you the chance when you maybe have been injured, or you were maybe having doubts, or just gave you that opportunity to push on to what you then had a very long career?
The only one who kind of took a chance on me, I would say, at the time was John Coleman when I'd had the bad spell at Oldham. When I left Bristol Rovers, one of the main reasons that I got told by the manager was, you've been injured too much and you can take your injuries elsewhere. So after that spell, it was John Coleman who gave me that opportunity to kind of say, look, we've dealt with you before. We know you're a decent player. Come back to us, come and play some games. And, thankfully, I had the opportunity and I took it and I backed myself to go and play and do well, which we did. And I was able to kind of, believe in myself that I was able to go and progress again. And the other managers that I had in between that, at Oldham, Dave Penny, who kind of didn't want anything to do with me because I was injured. It felt like Paul Dickoff came in the summer, and I actually really liked Paul Dickoff, even though he was the one who told me to leave. I actually really liked him and got on with him, and he was a lot more understanding. I think he was a lot more recently retired and probably realised what was going on a lot more with me. And he was a good guy, and I was fine with what he had to say, and I know that conversations like that happen all the time in football, and new manager comes in and needs to bring his own players in and get rid of a few. That's fine. I understood that. So I was thankful for John, and then I managed to prove by playing 30 games the rest of that season that I could play. I was fit and I was, good enough to maintain that. And I think it wasn't until my first season at Shrewsbury where I played, 45 games, that I'd had for a few years a solid season where I was playing week in, week out. And I think the more you get into those rhythms of playing those games, I think the easier it becomes then to carry on playing those games. I think once you're in and out of the team, you're not getting the minutes that you need. I think that's when injuries occur. So I was always a case of play every game. I trained as much as I could, never took a day off training. Optional days where the team played on a Saturday and Monday, you didn't need to go outside. I was outside up until 37. I was doing that every Monday because I didn't want to let my body switch off for a second and then suffer afterwards.
Now, obviously, social media has become such a huge thing in sport, in life in general, and with footballers. Now, I spoke to loads of people. Some pay more attention to it than others. Some just don't care. Some are actually openly affected by what they see. What were you like in your career
with social media?
Yeah, just like your reaction to if you were injured or if you'd had a bad game or the team hadn't done well for a period of time and you saw all the comments from people, because inevitably they'll come.
Yeah, and look, social media wasn't a big thing the early part of my career, and probably a good thing for me, because you see it all. It doesn't when every manager and every player says I don't look at, they do. They know what's going on. They see the comments, and they'd be the first people, if they played well, to go on social media and post a million things. So the fact that they do that when they win, when they don't win or they play badly, they're still doing the same thing. They're just not posting it. So that was tough, and I've been fortunate that I've never been kind of badly abused, or I think in the social media era, since that's all been kind of the forefront of fandom, as it were, then I haven't I've been probably quite fortunate that I haven't really had a bad spell, or I don't think I've had a bad spell. I've been in the team constantly and consistently, and we've had success along the way. So I don't think I've put myself in a position to get kind of shot at a lot. But yeah, it's when you do see the odd comments of people questioning your ability, you get your legs are gone and things like that. The amount of times I thought, should I? We get the data and the stats every single day from training, and I can tell you the quickest sprint I ever did in my whole career was about February this year. So, I could easily post that and be like, actually, I'm quicker than I ever was 15 years ago, where legs weren't an issue, but because of my age. But it's once you start going down that hole, I don't think there's a way back. And I see people biting at things and responding, and I'm just like, I'm the guy in the changing room to say, look, just read it, whatever. But you don't need to respond. They want a response off you so that they can show their mates, or they can, they'll win. Doesn't matter what they say. They can abuse you. As soon as you do one comment back, they've got you. So just stay away from it. Read it if you want. If it helps you, if it doesn't help you, whenever I saw a negative kind of comment about me, I'd want to prove them wrong. I'd never let people know that I'd seen anything, but of course, we've all got Instagram and Twitter. It was there. It was, you get notifications or whatever. So yeah, it was just, I think, because I was a bit more experienced in it, I kind of knew how to deal with it more as such, and when the right time was to say something or not to say something. My thing was, there's always a game a few days later. If you just celebrated too much, it could come back and bite you on the ass very, very quickly. So I never was too high, and then I was never that low as well, because I knew that it can turn around so fast.
Yeah, well, it's a fair thing to say then that you built up enough credit at the clubs that you were at to not get abused too much.
Yeah, I was fortunate that I stayed at Shrewsbury. I played a lot of games, had a lot of success, and left by being player of the year. So there was no kind of, even though we got relegated, I never suffered the abuse. A lot of the players did, and maybe Shrewsbury and Wycombe aren't the clubs where the fan bases are brutal. They're nice places, they're nice clubs. I think that has a big impact on it as well. And yeah, I think that if for whatever reason, I've always had a good rapport with the fans and got on with them. And I think I've made sure that I've always taken time to speak to them after games, before games. I'll always turn up at events and things like that. So I think that gives you credit as well, that when, they're such small clubs, or not such, but they're small clubs at Wycombe, I've probably met 90% of the fans at some point, or said hello to, or shook someone's hand. And, and I think if they get that little personal touch off a player, I think they'll think twice then about maybe saying something negative towards him. So I was always kind of, making sure that I was on point. And I remember having a conversation with Andrew Howard, who was, when I first joined Wycombe, he was the chairman. I was just taking over the chairman, and he was involved in motor racing, and he was always like very much on comms about what to say, when to say it. We even had a day once when Henry Winter came into the training ground and was kind of teaching us how you should respond to things, or if I said this, and this to you, how would you respond? So, and I always think of myself as being quite switched on. I think I got stitched up when I was younger. I was playing for Bristol Rovers, and I had a tackle with Kieran Dyer, and Kieran Dyer suffered a double leg break in the tackle. It wasn't like a big heavy challenge or anything like that, and really unfortunate incident. And I remember just walking off the pitch after the game, and the manager had spoken to me and said, "Look, it's not, it's not your fault. It's just one of those things." And there was a guy just walking out with me, and he was like, "So what do you, explain the situation today?" And it was unfortunate. I was like, "Yeah, the manager said, it's not my fault. It's unfortunate." And anyway, the next day in the Sun newspaper, there was a headline that saying, "Joe, like, Dyer's injury is not my fault. And I was like, oh no. So
Yeah.
from that moment on, I was like, right, let's just make sure that I'm switched on. Be careful everyone you talk to because they're all trying to get something out of you.
Yeah, because that must be a common thing that happens in football. I mean, you see it on the news all the time. I learned very quickly when I was younger and I went to a sport uni to not necessarily believe the headlines because it's just a catch to get you in. And now doing the job that I do with titles and marketing and stuff is that you want to draw people in with that. Do you think the papers and the media were fair on you with your injuries, or would you say they didn't really pay much attention? I don't really know wording of that question. I guess it's, do you feel that you got a negative or positive media approach to you and your career of injuries?
Do you know what? I'd say, look, the level that we play at, or I played at, there probably wasn't much media scrutiny on injuries. You see someone like Mason Mount at the minute who's, people don't know what he's going through, but, all you see in the papers are he's made of glass, he's unfit, he's not looking after himself right. But, he could be going through all sorts of problems and trying to play through pain barriers and things like that just to get out on the pitch because he signed for a new team and he wants to help out. So, again, I didn't live at Oldham. I didn't live in Oldham or quite. I lived in Manchester, so I was away from probably the core group of fans that I wouldn't bump into on the streets. Same at Wycombe. At Shrewsbury, I lived in the town, so I used to bump into fans and things, but I was okay there. I was never really injured or anything like that. So, yeah, it's. I think, like I said, I've always been good with the media guys. I think because I'll always say yes to things and I'll always, turn up to events, like I said, or do interviews that. I don't think they would. Well, I haven't had any negative stuff, I would say, written about me. I've probably been quite lucky with that, but I think it's more of the level that we're at. There isn't so much media attention towards it, apart from the local fans of your team.
Do you feel that there's enough of that in football? Do you feel that there's enough footballers and athletes that are open with the media? Because I imagine if you're cooperative with them to a degree, obviously, they're probably a lot better on you.
I think it's changed a lot. I think players used to be very loose with what they said, and then it came back and it bit them hard. So I think then they went completely away from it and didn't want to do anything. I think they're now a lot more trained in what to say, and they're a lot more savvy, and it's boring. Who wants to, you turn on a match on the weekend, and I can tell you before the game started what the managers are going to say after the game. No one gives anything away. I also think now that, especially high-profile players, they're kind of creating their own media now, so they'll release the narrative that they want to release. So Marcus Rashford this week, who, when he gets dropped out the squad, the first thing he does is tweet or puts on his Instagram, "Getting boys, I'm such a team player. I'm showing this narrative." Look, I'm not saying he's not or he is, but so they're creating their own media before anyone else can do it for them, which I think is very clever. And these guys, they need to do it because they're such big brands in themselves now. I think lower down, there's a guy at Exeter, a guy called Dimitri Mitchell. I don't know if you know, but he had a serious knee injury last year, and he's very active on social media, which he was like, "Look, I'm injured. I want to be active. I want to get involved in things." But then what comes with that is the abuse, and some players can't handle it and can't deal with it. Do I agree that it should be then? Absolutely not. But you can't stop it. That's the problem with social media. Until the regulators get a hold of it, it's never going to change. So I do think there's definitely a scope for players to be. I like the way that they're doing it now, is that they're creating their own media because they don't need someone to write false information about them. I think there's so many ways. They have so many followers. These players have more followers than the newspapers do. So people are going to get information off them rather than what a newspaper says now. So I think it's changed. It's kind of flipped on that in that sense.
So one of the last questions I've got here. Sort of what's your advice for people that get injured? Obviously, we spoke Anybody that knows me, I'm so far away from being any sort of footballer, but suffering the injury that I did, although it's a freak, random, it doesn't happen often. People in my situation still get injured, and as we spoke about before, if you're a footballer, no matter what level, you get some degree of urgent attention, whether that's the physio, whether that's 10 guys coming up to you, whether that's an appointment very, very soon after. What's your advice to people like myself who went through it and maybe felt more isolated than what an athlete would?
I would say try to speak to as many people as you can that have maybe gone through things. I know it's easier said than done, but I suppose like yourself, if you had an injury, what's your next port of call? It's difficult for me to say because, like you said, when I've ever had an injury, and I'm 38, whenever I've had an injury in my life, I've had a physio there on call. I've had a doctor there. I've been sent for a scan the next day. I've had the results back the next night. Everything's been so instant, and I'm probably going to have to learn that now that it's not the real world. But I think just trying to speak to people and understanding what it is that that you're missing out on, I would say, because getting an injury, it will make you miss out on whether it's, actually playing the match if you want to play football. But I would still say definitely still get involved and be around the team as much as possible. I found that very difficult during the week was fine. On match days, I hated it. I hated not being involved. I hated watching the team, thinking, you all of a sudden become Lionel Messi watching the game, thinking I should have done this, this, and this, and this. But I would say if I could tell myself what to do, it'd be immerse yourself in it, be there, be the best supporter of your mate who's there playing, because one day it's going to flip round and you're going to want your mate kind of being there supportive of you. So I feel like that's hugely important of being a good team player, being around it as much as possible. Whenever there's team training sessions or things like that, I don't know whether you'd still go to sessions or training with your team when you're injured. I don't know, but if you can, then just to be around the place, you don't necessarily need to actually train, but just to have that kind of social togetherness, as it were, with the team environment. I think that's really, really important for mental health. And I was very fortunate that when I had those injuries and stuff, I was around groups of people, especially at Wycombe, where no one looked at. In your mind, you're thinking everyone's thinking you're injured, you're not part of this, but in their mind, they just want to help you. They want to make sure you're okay. Because I've done it. I've been there when I've seen injured players, and I want to sit with them and talk to them and make sure that everything's all right. They're getting the best treatment. Talking about their plan, when they're going to get back. Little things where players have long injuries of just getting out on the grass, that first jog, which is nothing in the grand scheme of things, but going out and watching them doing it and being there and celebrating, high-fiving them when they're doing their first turn or their first sprint, whatever it is, just to make them feel like they're still part of this group. I think that's massively important.